My name is Nina Bell, and I'm 27 years old. I was raised in the small town of Elmswood, Virginia, where pine trees line every dirt road and gossip travels faster than a cold wind off the Blue Ridge. I wasn't born lucky, but I was born loyal. My mama always said I carried the heart of 3 women in one ribcage. Maybe she meant it as a compliment, but sometimes I wish my heart hadn't been quite so soft, because soft hearts bruise easy. And mine? It was shattered on Christmas Day. Let me take you back. The first time I met Caleb Everett, I was standing on the porch of Sawyer's General Store holding 2 sacks of flour and a broken heart from some boy who'd gone north. Caleb was passing through town, an investor from Charleston with a rough voice and polished boots. Said he was looking to buy farmland, but he looked at me like he wanted more than soil. He courted me slow and sweet, sent letters written in ink, and promises, sang old hymns with his sleeves rolled up. The kind of man who looked good in candlelight and even better in moonlight. And on a cold December evening, right there under the sycamore tree where Pa used to hang the Christmas lanterns, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. I said yes, Lord. I said it with every bone in my body, but if you ask anyone in Elmswood what the Bell sisters were known for, it wasn't just our pies or our piano playing, it was the rift between me and my younger sister, Clara. Clara Bell was prettier, more charming. Where I was quiet, she was quick. Where I stitched quilts, she stitched hearts. Men loved her, women envied her, and Mama always said she had a wildness in her eyes you couldn't teach nor tame. I loved Clara once. Before Caleb, before everything. But there are some betrayals so deep, they steal not just your trust but your blood. The week before Christmas, Caleb grew distant. Said he had business in Norfolk. Said he'd return by Christmas morning with something shiny and new. I believed him. I even stitched the initials C onto his stocking. Mama and Papa were planning a small engagement supper. Clara said she wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be attending. I thought nothing of it until midnight struck on Christmas Eve. At exactly 12:01 a.m., Mrs. Dalrymple, our pastor's wife, showed up at our doorstep in a cloak and snow-covered boots, holding a local registry notice. She didn't say a word, just handed it to me and walked away. It read, marriage license, Caleb Everett and Clara Bell, legally joined in matrimony on the 24th of December, at St. Jude's Chapel, Norfolk County. I stared at the paper. My knees gave out. Mama screamed. Papa punched the wall so hard the lanterns shook. And me? I didn't shed a tear. Not then. Not in front of them. I waited till the house fell asleep. Then I walked barefoot to the barn, sat in the cold hay, and cried until dawn. He proposed to me, but married my sister. On Christmas. Let that sink in. A man I gave my soul to. A sister I shared my childhood with, together, in a church. Without me. They took everything from me. My love, my pride, my future. But they forgot something important. They left me alive. And a woman left alive with a broken heart and a mind full of quiet is the most dangerous kind. Because I wasn't going to scream. I was going to build. The morning after the world fell apart, the sun rose like nothing had changed. The frost still clung to the window panes. Papa's boots still thudded against the old porch boards. Mama still stirred her coffee in that slow, thoughtful way she had when pain ran deeper than speech. But inside me, something had died, and something else had been born. I wasn't Nina Bell, the girl with soft hands and a stitched heart anymore. I was Nina Bell, the woman who would never let herself be stolen from again. Clara didn't come home that morning. She didn't write, didn't call. Didn't send a messenger with an apology or even a lie. Caleb? Not a word. And that silence? It carved something sharp in me. It taught me that betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it tiptoes in wearing white lace and a smile that used to be familiar. I didn't cry again. Not publicly. Not when word spread through Elmswood like wildfire that Clara landed herself a Charleston man. Not when old neighbors dropped off congratulation letters meant for me. And certainly not when Mrs. Dalrymple stopped me outside the general store and whispered, "The Lord works in mysterious ways." No, I didn't cry, but I did start planning. In Elmswood, folks don't look twice at a quiet girl taking sewing commissions. They don't ask questions when she buys ledgers from Old Man Hutchins or spends her Sundays sketching blueprints in the church basement. They just assume she's healing. But I wasn't healing. I was digging into Caleb's background. His family ties, his holdings, the paper trails he thought no one in a small town could ever understand. I found out he didn't buy land, he bought debt. He flipped properties under different names, promised partnerships, then vanished once the ink dried. That Charleston accent wasn't charm. It was camouflage. And Clara? I doubt she even knew the full extent of what she'd married into. I needed power, not pity. And power in Elmswood came in two forms. Land Monet had neither. But I had something else. A name. The Bell name in this town still meant something. My grandfather built 3 barns and the town's first watermill. My mother taught to generations of children to read. Even the mayor owed his first campaign posters to Puss Printing Press. So I made a decision. If they had taken my heart, I'd take their legacy. I started with Harbor Hill, an abandoned cotton mill on the edge of town. Folks said it was cursed, haunted, or full of bats. I said it was opportunity. I offered to buy it at auction using a loan co-signed by my old teacher, Miss Adeline. She'd taught me arithmetic and trusted me with her last savings. Make it worth something again, she said, handing me her cane and her confidence, and I did. By spring, Harbor Hill had been converted into Bell and Birch Mercantile Cooperative, a women-run trading post that offered fair wages, handmade goods, and most importantly independence. Women from all over came. Caleb Everett didn't come back to Elmswood for sentiment. He came back for survival. Word was spreading through the outer counties that his deals in Charleston had soured. A cotton shipment never reached its buyer. A tobacco deal collapsed. And the bank Barnett and Sons Trust had begun whispering about foreclosure. He needed stability, and Elmswood, with its slow pace and familiar faces, must have looked like a good place to land. Like a pillow he once fluffed but never meant to sleep on. But what he didn't know, what Clara didn't know, was that the pillow had caught fire. And I was the one holding the match. It wasn't just Harbor Hill I had my hands in anymore. I bought the tailor's shop when old Mr. Ward retired and trained 2 of my old schoolmates to run it. I invested in the candle works, partnered with the apple orchard, and signed a quiet deed to the town's freight barn, which Caleb had once tried to acquire himself. Every time he reached out for footing, I'd already bought the ground beneath him, and still, I didn't tell him who was behind it all. There's a particular pleasure in revenge slow cooked. Clara came to see me one afternoon. I was counting ledgers in the back of the mercantile when the bell on the front door jingled. She hadn't changed much. Still wore her hair in ribbons. Still smiled like she meant it even when she didn't. She said, "Nina, can we talk?" I nodded and gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, fidgeted with her gloves, and said what I already knew. Things with Caleb, they're not what I thought. She told me he drank more, that he lost money on a riverboat gamble, that he'd been borrowing from her personal savings and still hadn't repaid her father-in-law's business note. But I love him, she added quickly. I know he's good underneath. I smiled politely. You always did like broken things. She winced. Then, her voice cracked. Did you ever love him? Now, that was a question, and I had a choice: truth or something more useful. I leaned forward. Clara, he was the first man who looked at me like I mattered. But no, I don't love him anymore, and I'm not here to take him back. It wasn't a lie, not completely, but I didn't tell her what I was truly after, because I wasn't trying to win Caleb. I was trying to destroy everything he built his lies on. The next week, I met with Mr. Howard Sloan, the vice president of Barnett and Sons Trust. He had heard about my quiet rise in Elmswood and requested a meeting at Thatcher's tea room. He said, "Miss Bell, we're looking for strong investments. Women of discretion, landowners with influence." I smiled. "I'm listening." By the time the apple trees blossomed, I had acquired the debt Caleb owed to the bank, an arrangement sealed quietly through a shell firm I'd named Lantern Holdings. The debt was now mine, his fate, mine to decide. Still, I waited, because revenge isn't just about winning, it's about the moment they realize they've already lost. On the 4th of July, the town held a modest fair. There were fireworks and lemonade, fiddles and fried pies. Caleb walked in with Clara, wearing that same crooked smile he once used to win me. He waved to the mayor, tried to charm the young schoolteachers, but when he came near my booth, a display of embroidered handkerchiefs with initials hand-stitched by widows I'd trained, he hesitated. He reached for one. I raised a brow. "Those are for gentlemen who pay their debts." His hand froze midair. I saw it, the confusion, the dread, the beginning of recognition. He tilted his head. "You?" I leaned close and said softly, "Welcome to Lantern Holdings, Mr. Everett. You owe us $38,000 with interest." He turned pale. Clara looked between us, confused. I handed him the debt notice with my signature on it. He stared, silent, powerless. That's when it hit him. He hadn't married the prettier sister. He'd married the one who would never see him coming. I'll never forget the look on Caleb's face that day. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sorrow. It was something worse, realization. Realization that the girl he left weeping in the barn now held the deed to his future. And the ink wasn't dry, it was scorched into parchment. He didn't say a word. Not to me. Not to Clara. Just took the folded debt notice, nodded once like a man defeated, and walked away into the crowd of fireworks and fiddles. I didn't celebrate that night. Didn't dance. Didn't smile. Because the victory wasn't mine yet. Not until he knew what it felt like to lose everything. The way I had. Clara showed up the next morning at my doorstep, no ribbon in her hair, no smile on her face. She looked tired, hollow. I didn't know, she said, eyes rimmed with red. He never told me how bad it was. I didn't move from the porch. I simply said, he told me nothing either. Right before he married you. Her lip trembled. What are you going to do? And for a second, I almost softened, almost. But the ache in my chest reminded me that mercy was a privilege he'd never offered me. I'm going to collect, I said, then closed the door. By the time autumn rolled in, the trees of Elmswood had gone copper and gold. It was the kind of season Caleb once said reminded him of Charleston, back when he made empty promises under sycamore trees. But this time, he wasn't walking through leaves with laughter. He was pacing the halls of the Everett house, his last asset in Elmswood, wondering when the wolves would knock. The wolves were already inside. He came to me on a cold October morning, no longer in fine boots or a crisp vest. His coat had worn elbows. His eyes carried sleepless nights. Nina, he said, hat in hand. Please, Claire's pregnant. Pregnant. A word like a thunderclap in the ribs. I blinked. That doesn't change the debt, I said. He stepped forward, voice low. She's your sister. No, I corrected him. She was. But you made sure to break that too. I didn't mean for things to happen like this. I folded my arms. But they did. And I meant for this to happen. Every piece of it. He left in silence, jaw clenched. And I knew then, desperation was setting in. So I pushed the final piece into place. The Everett house, a white pillared estate just outside the Orchard Road. I walked through the Everett house on Christmas Eve like a woman reclaiming sacred land. Each creaking floorboard felt like the spine of a story I once tried to forget. The grand staircase Caleb used to boast about. The parlor where Clara had unwrapped her wedding gifts. The kitchen where I once imagined cooking for the man who asked for my hand. Now it was mine. All of it. And I didn't buy it for comfort. I bought it to bury what hurt me. Room by room. The next morning, while most of Elmswood was gathering at the town chapel or lighting candles for the midnight hymn, I stood at the window of the upstairs bedroom, the one that used to belong to Caleb and Clara. The bed was stripped bare. The walls echoed with silence. And from that window, I watched them leave the town, a broken wagon, one horse, and no destination. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this kind of power, only stillness, the kind that comes after a storm has flattened the trees but spared the roots. By New Year's, I'd converted the Everett house into a women's retreat, not a charity but a sanctuary, a place for women who had been cast aside, forgotten, underestimated. Just like I had been, we called it the Hearth, and it wasn't long before word spread across counties. They came from all over, young girls fleeing arranged marriages, widows cheated of land, seamstresses whose wages had been stolen. I offered them room, board, and work. In exchange, they helped me expand Bell and Birch, the cooperative I'd started with my first loan and 100 silent prayers. One of them, a clever girl named Margaret, took over the accounting. Another, June, was a gifted carpenter. She built shelves, fitted doors, repaired wagons. We weren't just women rebuilding our lives, we were building a legacy. One afternoon, while I was overseeing shipments at the Mercantile, a rider galloped into town covered in dust, panic in his voice. There's been a fire, he shouted, out past the river road near Haverly's Grove. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. That was where the Everetts had been seen last. I rode out with the sheriff and a few men. The air was thick with smoke, the sky bruised and gray. Near the edge of a pine thicket, we found a smoldering wagon. The wheels were charred, the horse was gone, and the few items left behind told a story clearer than any confession. A cracked wedding photo, a silver hairbrush, one of Clara's hand-stitched shawls, but no bodies. And no blood. And no footprints, just ashes and absence. The sheriff muttered something about bandits or an accident with a lantern. I said nothing, but in my bones I knew they had fled, not just from the town, from the truth, from what they'd become, or maybe from who I'd become. I returned to the hearth that night, the flames still dancing in my memory, and I thought, is this what victory tastes like? Because it didn't feel sweet. It felt hollow, like the echo of a bell that no longer rings. But then, I stepped into the kitchen, where Margaret had baked cinnamon bread, and June had repaired the old wooden table where the women now sat laughing, sewing, dreaming, and I realized something. My revenge was never about Caleb, or Clara, or even the wedding dress I never wore. It was about making space in a world that tried to erase me. Still, part of me wondered, would I ever see them again? Would Caleb ever dare show his face in a town he once ruled? Would Clara write, or beg forgiveness, or finally admit her part in the betrayal? Or were they just ghosts now burned away in the fire they started? By the first thaw of March, the snow in Elmswood had melted, but the weight of that winter lingered. Every time I passed the mirror in the hall of the hearth, I didn't just see my reflection, I saw the ghosts of choices I couldn't take back. But I didn't flinch, because every brick I'd laid, every contract I'd signed, and every quiet, calculated decision I made was not born out of malice. It was born out of memory. The memory of standing in the churchyard in a hand-sewn dress, watching Clara kiss the man who'd once begged for my forever. But things were changing in Elmswood. The townspeople, once quick to whisper, now greeted me with warm nods and firm handshakes. Mothers sent their daughters to the hearth with shy smiles and nervous eyes. And the mayor himself, Mr. Harlan Case, approached me with a proposal to join the town council for development and land use. Imagine that. The girl who was once denied entry to the Christmas gala now had a seat at the very table that built the gala. I didn't gloat. I signed the charter, and at that moment, I became what no man had ever allowed me to be, the architect of my own story. Still, even power brings its own kind of loneliness. One evening, while sorting invoices beside the fire, I received a letter, unmarked, folded thrice, no seal. Inside, 3 sentences. We're in Westville now. Claire's with child. I hope someday you understand. There was no name, but the handwriting his was unmistakable. My fingers trembled, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I felt done. I didn't reply. I placed the letter in the fireplace, watched the paper curl into smoke, and whispered the last words I'd ever say to him: good riddance. Spring brought color back to the hills. The orchard bloomed early. The town held a fair for the first time since the fire, and a group of girls from the hearth opened a small press, printing poetry and pamphlets. They called it Bell Sisters Inc. I never asked them to name it after me, but maybe they understood something even I didn't. This was never just about revenge. It was about building something lasting from the ruins. Late one night, I found myself back at the chapel. Not for prayer. I never trusted prayers much after what happened, but I lit a candle and stood beneath the high rafters, remembering the night Clara was married here, how the preacher's voice cracked with cold, how Caleb's hand was wrapped in hers like they'd never done me wrong. I stood in that same spot, alone, and I smiled, because now, I didn't need a man beside me to feel complete. I didn't need a borrowed surname or a diamond promise. I had the hearth, the press, the council, and a town that no longer pitied me. The next morning, a little girl knocked on my door. She was no more than 9, in worn boots and a coat too large for her. Are you Miss Bell? She asked. I knelt to her level. I am. My mama said you help girls who ain't got nowhere else to go. I nodded. What's your name, darling? Lottie. Well, Lottie. The wind shifted that summer, warm, sweet, and full of stories. By now, the hearth was no longer just a refuge. It had become a movement. Townsfolk from as far as Birch Hollow and Sutter's Ridge sent letters asking if their daughters, widows, or housemaids could come and learn under our roof. We had begun training women in skills that most men wouldn't dare offer: ledgers, property law, contracts, even horsemanship. And every Sunday, I taught writing, not just the forming of letters, but the shaping of voices, because for too long, women like us were spoken about, but never allowed to speak back. One afternoon, as the girls practiced signatures on parchment, June the carpenter set down her tools and placed a bundle of papers in my hands. These are yours, she said. We found them in the attic, tucked inside the panel behind the mirror in the master bedroom. I opened the bundle carefully. It was a stack of letters. Some yellowed, others crisp. All of them sealed but never sent. All of them. From Caleb. The first one was dated December 26th, the day after their wedding. Nina, I know you won't read this, but I can't go on without saying what I couldn't say at the altar. I was a coward. You deserved better. I only hope one day you find it. The rest were scattered across months, even years. I think of you every time Clara sings in the garden. You should have been the one in that house. I've made a mistake I can never undo. Some were written with ink so faint, it looked like tears had blurred the words, but one dated nearly a year later stood out. You were the fire I feared and the warmth I longed for, but I ran from it. And I've been cold ever since. I folded the last one slowly, carefully. Then I placed the bundle in the wood stove and lit a match. Some stories aren't meant to be preserved. Some endings deserve ash, not memory. That night, I walked the orchard alone. Fireflies lit the trees like little lanterns. The world was quiet, and in the silence, I made a promise to myself. No more ghosts. Weeks passed. On a soft September morning, a stranger came riding into town, a man in a black coat and wide-brimmed hat. His horse was dusted from a long journey. His face shadowed but steady. He walked into the general store, asked for a room at Widow Hartley's, then left a letter addressed to me. It arrived by sundown. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Clara. Nina, I don't ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know I named her after you. Nina Bell Whitaker. She's kind and strong, and I pray she grows up nothing like me. Thank you for the house, even if we didn't deserve it. I hope someday you find the happiness we took from you. Clara. Me breath caught. I read it again and again until the ink blurred. Not from fire, from something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Grief. The next morning, I wrote one line on a fresh page. You and I may never meet again, Clara. But tell Nina Bell, she has her aunt's fire. Then I sealed it and gave it to the writer. He tipped his hat and rode off into the sunrise. I stood on the porch of the hearth, the wind brushing against my face, thinking of the little girl I might never meet, and I realized something. The revenge that once fueled me had turned to root, grown into shelter, into a legacy not built on pain but on possibility. Autumn wrapped Elmswood in golden hush. Leaves drifted like forgotten promises across the hearth's gardens, and the orchard trees stood bare, their fruit long picked, their branches proud. And still, inside the hearth, we prepared for the second winter fair, a new tradition we started the year after I bought Everett House. The girls strung garlands across the porch, baked cinnamon rolls that warmed the air, and stitched quilts. With phrases that stitched us together, we mend what they tear. A woman's silence is not her consent. Fire builds, not just burns. I watched from my study window, a cup of strong tea in hand, when a knock came on the door. It was June, her sleeves dusted with flour and her cheeks flushed. Nina, she said, someone's asking for you. Says she's traveled a long way. I followed her to the entryway. Standing there, uncertain and poised like a ghost unsure of its welcome, was a girl no older than 17. She wore a brown coat too thin for the season, boots worn at the heels, and a satchel that looked as if it carried her entire life. I'm looking for Miss Nina Bell, she said, her voice like broken leaves. You found her, I said softly. She paused, then whispered, my mama was Clara Whitaker. I think I'm named after you. I blinked, and for a moment, I saw Clara in her eyes. Not the bride who stole my Christmas, but the sister who once braided my hair when I cried over lost ribbons. I stepped forward. And your name? Nina Bell Whitaker, she said. I held her gaze. Well then, I said, you're exactly where you're meant to be. That night, she shared her story in fragments. Clara had passed the previous spring peacefully, in her sleep. Caleb had left years before that, chasing fortune in the West. And Nina Bell had been raised on stories. Stories about me, not bitter or blaming, but hopeful, almost mythical. She said you were fire, the girl told me, not the kind that destroys, the kind that keeps others alive when they're cold. I didn't cry, but I sat beside her long after the lamps burned low, listening to her voice, her laughter, her grief. By morning, I gave her the upstairs room, mine. She belonged there more than I ever had. Weeks passed, and Nina Bell proved as capable as her name. She learned fast books, ledgers, even carriage repairs. The other girls adored her, and I found a part of my soul softening again, not because I miss Clara, not even because I wanted a niece, but because it reminded me, even from betrayal, something good can bloom. One day, as we sat in the orchard pruning branches for winter, she asked, "Why did you forgive her?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Because revenge is like fire. If you keep it too long, it burns the hand that holds it." She nodded. "But it can also light the way." "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, it can." We buried a time capsule in the garden that week. Letters from the girls, a quilt square, a list of every woman who'd passed through the hearth and left stronger than she arrived. I placed one item in last, a photograph. Emmy and Clara, before the wedding, before Caleb, before the hurt, two sisters holding hands on a wooden fence, faces. To the wind.as we sealed the box. I whispered, "Let them remember not just what happened but what we became." The town of Elmswood prepared for winter in the way only small towns do, early, thoroughly, and with stories stitched into every woolen scarf. The hearth, preparations for the winter fair were nearly complete. Girls bustled with final crafts. Carriages came by daily with donated preserves and decorations, and the large barn behind the orchard, once used for storing regrets and broken furniture, had been transformed into a warm, golden-lit hall. And this year, for the first time since I returned to Elmswood, the townspeople invited me to speak at the opening of the fair, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of respect. They asked me to share the story of the hearth. I said yes, but I didn't write a speech. Instead, I let the truth rise from within me. On the day of the fair, the wind carried a sharpness that made your lungs feel clean just breathing it. Nina Bell helped me dress, her hands steady as she fastened the brooch at my collar, one that had once belonged to my mother. "You look like a queen," she whispered. I touched her cheek and smiled. "I feel like a woman who finally stopped kneeling." The barn glowed with oil lanterns and laughter. Men in wool coats stood beside their wives as the girls from the hearth presented their quilts, their poetry, their ledgers full of balanced budgets. No man sneered. Not anymore. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped to the front of the platform, looked out over the people who had once watched me walk away in disgrace, and said only this: I was left at the altar in the cold of Christmas. I was told I wasn't enough, not rich enough, not gentle enough, not quiet enough. So I built a place where women were more than enough. And this town helped me make it real. Thank you for letting me turn a wound into something worthy. Then I stepped down. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was sacred. And then came the applause. Slow, then surging. It was the sound of healing. That night, by the fire, Nina Bell brought out a box, one she'd found tucked in an old cabinet we hadn't opened in years. Inside, a folded wedding invitation, still sealed. In its lace envelope, the invitation to Clara and Caleb's wedding. I stared at it a moment, then chuckled. "Do you want to read it?" she asked. "No," I said. "Let it stay unopened, like a door I never needed to walk through." The next morning, a rider came from Westville. He brought word that Caleb Whitaker had passed, a horse accident on the edge of a mine. No one claimed his body. They wanted to know if the hearth would bury him. I said yes, not because I loved him, but because I loved who I became without him. We buried him quietly. No headstone, just a pine marker near the back fence beneath the elm tree where Clara and I used to swing as girls. And once again, I spoke no speech, because some silences carry the loudest truths. That evening, Nina Bell stood beside me in the orchard, her eyes wide with the starlight above. "And Nina," she said softly, "what's next?" I looked at her, the girl with my fire in her bones, and said, "Whatever we want." Because revenge had come and gone. Because healing had taken root. Because legacy doesn't ask permission, it burns its own path. Winter settled into Elmswood. Like a soft hush, snow glazed the rooftops. Pines stood dressed in white. And at the hearth, laughter echoed louder than the wind. It was Christmas Eve again. But this time, there was no silence, no sorrow at the doorstep, no bride left in the cold. This time, the hearth blazed bright. Inside, the long table was set with simple food and love-slicked memories: cranberry preserves, roasted squash, honey rolls made by Claire's recipe, and mulled cider poured into chipped mugs that didn't match but belonged. Nina Bell stood beside me, tall now, no longer the shy girl in threadbare boots. She wore a green velvet dress, one she had stitched herself, and a pin that had once belonged to my mother. I, too, had dressed for the occasion, not out of vanity, but celebration. Not of a man, not of a marriage, but of every woman who rose from ruin. As guests arrived, townsfolk, students, neighbors, even those who once whispered behind curtains. I stepped out into the snow-dusted porch. Nina Bell joined me. You ever think about how it all began? She asked. I think about it less and less, I admitted. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've outgrown it. She looked at me, thoughtful. But the hurt, it still mattered, didn't it? I nodded. Of course. Hurt taught me how to build. Love taught me where to build. And betrayal taught me what to guard. Inside, the clock struck 7. The girls began handing out small wrapped gifts, handmade soaps, stitched bookmarks, poems copied by candlelight, each gift wrapped with a tag that read, "From one woman to another, keep building." I smiled, not because of the gifts themselves, but what they meant, that my revenge had evolved. It was no longer sharp. It was wide. It was not a weapon, but a welcome. Later that night, as the guests departed and snow began falling thick, Nina Bell brought out a sealed envelope. I found this in the old barn desk, she said. It's addressed to you. From Clara. One more letter, I guess. I hesitated, then opened it. Nina, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I hope you're not alone anymore. I hope you've built something. And I hope despite everything I helped light even one corner of your path. You were never just my sister. You were the better woman. I'm sorry I didn't realize it before the wedding, but I see it now, every day in my daughter's eyes. Please forgive me. Merry Christmas. Clara folded the letter gently and placed it on the mantel. I already did, I whispered. That night, as snow kissed the windows and the fire dimmed, I wrote my final entry in the heart's ledger. Started with pain, grew in silence, stood on ashes, but here we are, warm, whole, and unafraid. Let the next woman know. Love again, speak again, rise again. Nina Bell. And so my story ends not in the scream of betrayal, but in the echo of legacy. I was left on Christmas once, but now I leave doors open, hearts glowing, names remembered. Final reflection questions. Do you believe forgiveness is a form of power or surrender? Can revenge, when shaped by purpose, become something healing instead of destructive? Would you have opened Clara's last letter or left it sealed? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.